When a word like fascist becomes part of a major news story like a U.S. election, it is important to remember why that word is so important and the history behind it. That's why I knew I had to talk to Heather Cox Richardson, American history professor and the creator of the newsletter and podcast Letters from an American. She's also the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Democracy Awakening, Notes on the State of America. Watch this. Heather, thank you so much for joining me again. For the last few months, I've been saying we need Heather's expertise because the last time you and I spoke, you said that you did not believe Donald Trump was actually trying to win votes and that what he was just trying to do is create chaos and doubt that he would take advantage of after the votes are cast. We're now less than 2 weeks away. Has that opinion changed at all?
No, I don't think it has at all. I mean, think about the degree to which he has gone out of his way not to reach out to voters, to reject the Harris voters, for example, and really to focus on his base to see if he can get his base to turn out and cause chaos.
Fascist is a very big word, and it's a serious word. But Donald Trump's longest serving chief of staff, John Kelly, just used that very word to describe Trump after Trump suggested using the military on the enemy within. It was the enemy within that sort of got John Kelly. And the enemy within meant his political opponents. As a historian, how are you taking all of this?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that you are highlighting this because it's huge. And the degree to which it has been sort of brushed over today has really astonished me because it is a really, really big deal for John Kelly to have come forward and to have used that word because we understand just how closely associated it is with Hitler's Germany. And yet he went on to explain why he thought that and why he believed that Trump would, in fact, use the military against first his political enemies, because before you can go after the minority groups that are your base really wants to go after, you need to stop people from being able to push back against that. So you go after your political enemies first and go forward to create this authoritarian government. To me, it is the story of the election. We've seen it coming for a while. Kelly is not the first person to call attention to Trump's authoritarian ways. Mattis did the same thing. But it is something that people absolutely should be thinking about when they go to the polls on November 5th.
Donald Trump loves tariffs. He said tariff is his favorite word in the English language. And lately, he keeps pining for the good old days of the 1890s. And back in the 1890s, tariffs were widespread. But back then, politicians were honest. They were frank about the fact that tariffs were a tax on consumers. Donald Trump will still not admit that. Can you explain to our audience the difference between Trump's fantasy and the 1890s?
Sure. Well, you think about the 1890s, and he talks about what a wealthy period it was in the United States. But in fact, if you think about it, we had the people we now know of as the robber barons, the J.D. Rockefellers and Andrew Carnegies, who were building cottages in Newport, Rhode Island, that are these giant mansions. But at the same time, you had people working for them who had no protections. They had no government regulations for how they could be treated. They had no wage protections. They had no hour protections. Children were working in the factories. If you got mangled, for example, in a piece of machinery, you were out of work and out of luck. There was nobody who was going to come provide for you in any way. So when he's talking about this beautiful world as he sees it, he is thinking about the people who are on the very top, not the rest of us. And I think one of the things that you really need to understand when he talks about tariffs is tariffs in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, provided the money that the United States government used to do the things that it needed to do. And that changes dramatically with the Revenue Act of 1913, when the Democrats cut that tariff way back and they replace it with an income tax on high earners. So when Trump talks about having these high tariffs and pairs that with the idea of cutting taxes for the wealthy and for corporations, what he's really talking about is making sure that the actual funding of the U.S. government comes from the middle class rather than the people at the very top. And that's the exact opposite of what Vice President Kamala Harris is talking about. Again, a really different vision of the future that he wants for the country. And frankly, as a 19th century historian, I really never thought my knowledge of William McKinley was ever going to come in handy. It's not a direction that most of us think we'd like to go.
You know, it's so funny that you just mentioned the robber barons building cottages in Newport, Rhode Island, and two of the most recent purchases of those mansions, those estates in Newport have been a few years ago, Larry Ellison, and then Steve Schwartzman of Blackstone, who is maybe one of Donald Trump's biggest Wall Street backers and has become one of the wealthiest men in America. So it's so funny that you would compare the two. Steve's filling that house with priceless art as we speak. I want to ask you about Elon Musk, though. Oh, sorry. Yes.
But you know this so well. I mean, what they are really talking about is a world in which a very few people have the wealth and the power and the control over the rest of us, because they really believe a few people are really better than the rest of us. And that's, I think, one of the things that dovetails so effectively with fascism. That's a very similar ideology to fascism. So it's not an accident that the same people who built the cottages in Newport are being emulated now by the people now who are saying basically the same thing.
Then let me just ask you, are there any historical comparisons for the role Elon Musk has taken in this election?
Well, Elon Musk, I have to say, with his lottery and his moves on the stage there, is a unique individual for sure. That being said, you cannot look away from two things with Musk. One, that he is trying to buy an election, which again is very late 19th century. It was actually the election of 1890 that gives us modern campaign financing, when in fact, out of fear that ordinary people would elect a Democrat and get rid of the tariff, the John Wanamaker, who went on to be famous as the person who got the department store going, was the first financier of the Republican Party. And he simply went around to all his rich friends and said, please cough up the dough so we can put our guy in office. So there's partly buying the election. There is also, I think, something significant about Musk jumping in now. And that is that you cannot look away from the fact the Republican Party is in the middle of a civil war. Nobody quite knows who is going to take the mantle of Trump. And with the realization that J.D. Vance is now stepping in there, Trump is not mentally healthy. It looks like he's not going to be able to fulfill a full term. J.D. Vance is the obvious heir apparent. And now there seems to be a struggle going on over who is going to be the person behind J.D. Vance. And that, I think, the fact that Musk jumped in as he did, at the end as sort of a savior, says he would like very much to be part of that succession.